So I guess welcome to our network. Our network has now gone monthly. For those who haven't joined us before, if you can kindly put your names on the chat so I can make sure that we add you to our list, and we'll make sure that you have all the relevant correspondence that our network offers. We have a very important session today, and that is specifically dedicated to Ramadan and supporting self-care for our Muslim colleagues and for our service users. During this time, we are aware that Ramadan is due to start in the evening of the 12th. I think that date is now confirmed, my belief is. So it'd be really helpful to actually have some experts chatting about the importance of different aspects of their faith and how that impacts on them, and also about how to support service users between this period. So our network agenda starts with Dr. Sattar and then moves on to Dr. Khan, and then opens to the floor, and hopefully we'll have more members join as we proceed. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Mohammed Sattar, who is a GP, a Leeds GP, so he's a colleague of ours. He's a partner at the Woodhouse Medical Practice. He's also the founder and chair of the BAME Primary Care Network, the first of its kind, and also it's now expanding across the region. So he's really done quite a brilliant job in actually getting the GPs and getting doctors to begin to actually focus on race equality and health inequalities within this agenda. So I'm really pleased that Dr. Sattar has given us his time, and I will just pass on to you, Dr. Sattar. Now, if you'd like to share any slides, or I'm not quite sure how you would like to, so I can make you host, if that helps. My only problem,
Wendy, that's really great. Yeah, if you're able to do that. I'm aware, I've just looked at my email, that you just wanted me to send the presentation across. So one of the network members is able to access it as well. So I'll do that straight away.
Yes, so we'll also share your presentation as well wider with the trust. We do have a member who is intending to join, who would need a sign interpreter. So I just wanted to make sure that, that they had that in advance. They haven't yet arrived, so I'll just wait until they arrive.
Okay,
That's
no worries.
yeah. So I shall make you host then. You would have to admit my members.
Okay, that's all right.
Okay.
Is it? I don't think it's let me yet. Oh yeah, it's let me. That's fine. Yeah, cool. Done. Share screen. Opportunities. Share. Just make sure that everyone can see that. And so thank you for that introduction, Wendy, and it's really kind. I think we're made of the same cloth because you do equally amazing work. So thank you very, very much. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak today about Ramadan, in particular, focusing on diabetes. And I am a GP at the Woodhouse Medical Practice chair, and I wear several other hats as well. I don't know if Wendy's done the power of Twitter, but my Twitter handle is at being Mo, and there's nothing like the power of Twitter. So if anyone does want to tweet about the session today, please do so and tag not only me, but also Wendy. And the title of today's talk really is about opportunities for diabetes in Ramadan, because really this is an opportunity for us, not just an information giving or gathering session, but actually a real opportunity. Ramadan is a sort of line in the sand moment annually that we can prepare for, and we can also do something for our patients and our staff to make sure that actually we are inclusive, and also that we improve patient outcomes. So I wanted to start off, and I hope this works actually, I really do. I wanted to start off with the Surf Excel Ramadan advert that hopefully we'll be able to watch. Because each year in Pakistan and probably across the world, like Christmas in the UK and in the world, adverts are geared towards the times of celebration and observance, and Ramadan is no different. And each year, Surf Excel is a washing powder brand, and they annually release their amazing advert, and it's normally got a very spiritual message, an amazing singer or singers, and some really, really nice storylines. So I hope, I mean, it's only about 2 minutes, and I hope that we'll be able to listen to it. He says, hang on. So I'm just going to double check whether everyone can just see this video. If you just give me a nod or a sort of, you can. And let's just check if you can hear the audio. No. More. Share sound.
गरम समोसे जलेबी गरम अरे क्या कर रहे हो
मेरी पेशानी पे किस्मत ने चूमा है आज मेरी पेशानी पे किस्मत ने चूमा है माह मुक़द्दस में रोशन जहां है माह मुक़द्दस में रोशन जहां है
जलेबी नहीं है
ना फरिश्तों ने आकर किया समा खुशनुमा है
हमारे लिए
बाकी ये सब इन प्यारे बच्चों के लिए है
चूमा है आज मेरी पेशानी पे किस्मत ने चूमा है
किसी की मदद करना भी एक इबादत है और मदद करने में अगर दाग लग जाए तो दाग तो अच्छे हैं। इस रमजान आप भी अपने बच्चों को मदद करने की तरगीब दें। लॉग ऑन टू surfexcel.pk।
So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Unfortunately, we didn't see the audio, the visual of the video, but we did hear the audio.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah.
Okay, no worries. What I'll do is the PowerPoint that I circulate, well, I've already sent you, you'll be able to watch it. But it's a wonderful, wonderful video of a small child who helps a person who is selling samosas, and his four-wheel cart breaks down, and the kids take the samosas, and and he thought they were stealing them from him, but actually what they did was they helped him sell the samosas. And really the message of the video is that that helping another person is really a service to God, is really what the message of that video is. So I'm sorry you weren't able to see that. So essentially, Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Many people observe Ramadan. There are some people that are exempt from Ramadan, and namely those people are people who are people with advanced illness, people who are frail, people who are perhaps pregnant. But the most important thing to say is that actually, despite those exemptions, many people still choose to fast. And we're looking at about 148 million people who are Muslim with diabetes in the world, and 116 of those, 16 million of those will choose to fast. The duration of fasting is between 10 to 20 hours, depending on where you are. And we are moving towards the winter fast, which is shorter, and South Africa will be moving towards a summer Ramadan, which will mean that it's going to be longer. When we think about the fasting period, it's normally from sunrise to sunset. So clearly at the moment, the sunrise is, I don't know, about 5:30, sunset's about, about 7:45 maybe. And obviously that lengthens, and during that time, you are asked to fast or observe the fast. You know, the most important reason to actually be invited here today, I believe, and actually to do sessions such as this, is because it helps our patients. And actually, one study in 2010 in the Diabetic Medicine Journal showed that actually no education around Ramadan and diabetes meant that patients had a 4 times increase in hypoglycemic events. So that means low blood sugars and being unwell. And I suppose that's why we get out of bed every morning, is to help our patients improve outcomes. And that's really a really important message to give out today, is that actually us being here, listening to this may give us better outcomes for our patients. And the most important thing to say next is that both healthcare professionals and also religious leaders need to have a unified message when they are messaging around in particular conditions and Ramadan, and also diabetes and Ramadan. And the ways that we can work out who should fast and who shouldn't is by looking at stratifying patients into high, medium, and low risk, and then going from that stratifying methodology to work out whether or not they can go ahead and fast, and whether there's any adjustments to their treatment plan that need to be undertaken. Testing is a really, really big thing in Ramadan, and testing your blood sugar does not invalidate the fast. And also the correct guidance around when you need to break the fast if they are unwell, or there's certain reasons to break the fast. We need to make sure that people are, as professionals, aware of that, but also patients are aware of that. Let's throw back to 2019, where we reflected on the study that I've just named, which is the 2010 study, and risk of hypos, educating and really putting that at the heart of what we do. And I, with the help of people like Lisa Batkin, Jess Hellier, and also Ben Feely that you see in the picture there, lots of stakeholders came together in Leeds, and we delivered the Ramadan and diabetes advice sessions, 4 sessions done, 2 during the day and 2 in the evening, where we did a mixture of education. We did some cooking, we did some sort of review of medications for patients, blood pressures, and we also ate together, and it was an amazing thing. And there are some lessons on the right-hand side of the screen that we learned when we were setting up such a diabetes program for the city. So I thought it was really important to help you to see that and reflect on some of our learning. So if there was something like that you wanted to do, then you don't make the same mistakes as us. And it was a learning experience for me. I mean, I'm a Pakistani, and venue was important, and actually we probably didn't have the right venue for one of the sessions. And that was something that I didn't even think about, actually. And the second thing is, when we had our colleagues help us with cooking and teaching people about cooking and eating healthily during Ramadan, we were making things that actually perhaps culturally we won't make. And so when we ran the session again, I was quite conscious of that, and we then did things that were a little bit more relevant. So, for example, a mango lassi rather than soup. So there was a lot of learning that came out of that event. Some of the slides that I'm going to share are taken from a colleague of mine who I'll acknowledge towards the end of the talk. And this is one of her slides, Dr. Sarah Ali, who's a diabetologist, and they talk about the three-step approach when we're looking at diabetes and Ramadan. So that incorporates healthcare professional training and increasing awareness, starting down at the bottom then, ensuring that actually we're knowledgeable and culturally competent, and then looking at what people with diabetes need in terms of assessment and counselling 1 to 2 months before Ramadan, and then propelling that forwards and educating the family or caregivers of people with diabetes who wish to fast. You may wonder what happens physiologically when we fast, and this is a really nice slide taken from Diabetes UK website, and this talks about the 4 stages of what actually happens when we fast. COVID-19 pandemic we can't get away with, and actually I redid a lot of my slides to reflect the pandemic that we're living in at the moment. And colleagues such as Sarah Ali wrote a paper last year about managing people with diabetes fasting for Ramadan during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was part of the South Asian Health Foundation update. And if anyone does want to have a look at that paper, I've referenced it there for you. And the South Asian Health Foundation website is a fantastic resource. What struck me out of some of the slides that Dr. Ali shared with us at a conference was that actually 1/3 of COVID-19 deaths in hospital are in people with diabetes, 33.2%. And that really struck me, actually. And there's the evidence with the paper. What are the risks of fasting with people with diabetes during the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, the risks are not individual just for COVID-19, but actually can be extrapolated to times when we're not living within the pandemic. And these include low blood sugars, equally high blood sugars, something called diabetic ketoacidosis, and a similar condition, but actually we don't see ketones or the result of ketones in the urine, dehydration and thrombosis. Really important to just make sure that we do drive home the message of when it is important to break the fast. And here are some of the top sort of few instances where we would want you to be breaking the fast. So if there are any extreme differences in your blood sugars, if there is any illness, and especially COVID-19 means that you need to be breaking your fast and not observing fasting. And we talk about sort of 3 is the knees, so sort of 3.9 or below or above 16.6 as blood sugars as general rules of thumb. And then also this is also in people who are on insulin, and also something called sulfonylureas, the blood sugars, if they're low, below 3.9 at the suhoor. And the suhoor is where we take breakfast and then close the fast and begin fasting. So I've already sort of alluded to some of this, but actually if you are having symptoms of COVID-19, then you should not fast. It is advisable that people with type 1 diabetes not to fast if there are high rates of transmission of COVID-19 in their country, which is quite interesting. And also, again, going back to the point of checking blood sugars and knowing what to do when you've checked the blood sugar and you get a result that is not entirely right. It's really important to focus on lifestyle, and we need to make sure that we focus on food with a low glycemic index. So that's sort of food that is long carbohydrates, sustained release, energy, balanced meals considering portion sizes, and also making sure that you have your your meal that begins the fast at the latest time possible. So that you avoid hypos. Avoid dehydration. This is so difficult. 2 to 3 liters of water. You know, it's really, really hard because if you get up at, I don't know, 4 in the morning to sort of have your breakfast and go back to bed, by the time you've had a liter and a half of water, can't go to sleep because you keep going to the toilet. So it's a real dilemma, and sleep deprivation is something that I really suffer from actually during Ramadan. Physical activity is reduced, so there's altered sleeping patterns, there's also lethargy and also priority that people give to religious practices, going to the mosque during the evenings to observe extra prayers. And we do think that you don't need to stop exercise, but light exercise may be beneficial in avoiding weight gain, maintaining fitness, and improving mood and sleep. It's important to touch on COVID-19 vaccination, and actually we think that it is entirely permissible to have the vaccine if you are fasting. And also the other thing to say is that lateral flow testing is also permissible under the latest guidance that we have. So this is important, especially if you're managers, senior managers, or team leaders, so that you can advise appropriately your staff and your colleagues and patients, of course. There isn't much known about sort of fasting during pandemics, but there was a study done by Tehseen Chowdhury, Professor Tehseen Chowdhury, who works at the Royal London Hospital in East London. And East London, for those of you who have not visited the home of Brick Lane, is a very diverse area, has the largest population of Bangladeshis in the UK. And they carried out this survey, and actually it's quite a good survey. It looks like 86.3% of people who were advised not to fast followed that advice, and also 37.5% of patients said that COVID-19 had significantly influenced their decision not to fast. This is Sarah Ali's slides, some of them that I've taken, and I just wanted to plug her really, because big shout out to the work that they're doing. She's a consultant at the Royal Free. Now, if you do want some regular updates around diabetes and also the work that they're doing during Ramadan, then you can follow her Twitter handle, Ali, there. And she mentions this amazing quote from the Prophet Mohammed, peace be upon him: when you hear that the plague is in land, do not enter it. And if the plague breaks out in a place where you are in it, do not leave that place. And guess what? That's public advice that we've been given. If you want to take things forwards, and we're coming towards the end, and thank you so much for your attention today. There's some amazing stuff going on Twitter again. If there is somebody that wants to have a look at or gain some insights into Ramadan and also some of our preferences, and whether, you know, sometimes people say, I'm really sorry, Mo, I'm having my lunch and I know that you're fasting. I don't care, that's fine, I'm not offended, that's okay. We choose to fast and that's okay. But knowing whether or not that's okay is really difficult if you don't come from that faith, and you want to be culturally sensitive, and you want to be supportive to your fasting colleague. Then this is the sort of stuff that our very good friend Arij Abu Ali talks about. And this thread that she's done is really, really interesting. Even I enjoyed it, reading it. So it's about 15 tweets about sort of 12 steps of sort of helping your colleagues within the workplace, and also some of the etiquette and what to expect. So, even things like, is it all right to say Happy Ramadan? When do you say that? Well, it's rather like Happy New Year. We say it the whole of January, and that's the same for Ramadan. If you are wanting an app, and there's an app for absolutely everything these days, then this is the app that I would go for. This is the Dar Safa mobile app, and it's got these sorts of things on it. So it's got a nutrition plan, know what you're eating, patient information, and ask the expert. So the last slide, I do want to draw your attention to the Muslim census, and some of you may have seen the information around the Muslim census. What's interesting for me, and I've picked 3 key elements from their report recently, which is that Muslims are twice as likely to stick with employers who are supportive during Ramadan, which I found quite interesting. 65% of Muslims find that their place of work is supportive during Ramadan. And the most important bit of their census survey results for me were how Muslims ranked flexible shift patterns as the most desired support during Ramadan. So, and it looks like sort of regular breaks are down at the bottom there, reduced hours, annual leave, and team members understanding what Ramadan means to me, also quite high up there. So I suppose a way of working around sort of flexible shift patterns is home working has meant that we can do a lot that we said we couldn't do. We've enabled the technology. And so, allowing your team member to start a bit later, but actually they wouldn't want preferential treatment, I hope. They just go on an hour later. And if that can be done and you're able to accommodate for that, then I would really, really welcome that. So in summary, we have talked about sort of the essence of Ramadan, the importance of educating ourselves and patients about diabetes and the way to manage and keep safe. We've also not shied away from the COVID-19 pandemic, what it means for those people who are fasting, and also people who have diabetes. And we've ended with some other information that may help you to understand and better support colleagues and patients. I'll take any questions if there are any questions. And I hope that that's been really informative. Whistle stop tour. I was saying yesterday, I always do too many slides. I've got a fear of doing a talk and then running out of information and things to say, which I think is probably not a risk, but so I always over prepare, I suppose. But I welcome any questions or suggestions or thoughts that anybody may have. I'm not a diabetes expert, so I've drawn upon a lot of the experience that I might have and some of the things that I've come across. So I hope that that's really, really been informative. And anybody who's listening today who is going to embark on fasting over the next few weeks, I really wish you a happy Ramadan, Ramadan Mubarak, and I hope that it's a really successful one for you.
Thank you, Dr. Sattar. That was very, very informative and much needed during this time. It's the first time we are having a conversation around Ramadan. It's the first time we are actually having real discussions about how we can support colleagues and our service users. So I really appreciate your time. You talked a lot about, you sort of summarized lovely at the end. One of the most frequently asked questions that people kind of connect with me for is, how do we support our colleagues in terms of hydration, considering we do have a lot of inpatient services, people who are, and staff members who are in full PPE sometimes, or are having long shift periods where they may not, or there's a concern that they may not be as hydrated. How can we best support colleagues possibly during that period, especially if the weather is warmer as well?
Yeah, it's
Anything?
really tough, really
tip?
tough. And,
Yeah.
you know, people are saying like you need to have, you know, a liter of water, you know, just before you prepare for your fast and stop eating, you know, a liter sort of after breaking fast, and then sort of throughout the night whilst you're praying and doing other things. It's really tough because, you know, you're sleep deprived, and towards the end, you do feel really tired. And actually, if you're drinking 3 liters of water, then you're having to go to the loo, and you know it's just like a sort of a cycle. But I suppose little and often, and avoiding things like sugary drinks, and often we do things like have high water content foods, like watermelon is a classic. So really enjoy that. And also people look at things like lassies, so a yogurt milky drink that actually keeps people feeling more hydrated during this time.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I know a lot of my team members or colleagues before, their preference is to work during the night so that they can, when they break their fast, they're able to probably hydrate more frequently as well. So yeah, thank you for that. Any questions from anyone? Don't be shy. Caroline,
well, Wendy, I had my hand up. I don't know if you saw my hand up.
Yeah. Go on, Fee.
So I was just going to check, how would one go about supporting a service user who's expressed the wish to fast, but whose medication needs to be taken with food?
Sorry, that's a good question, and I think what needs to happen is a conversation with the clinician. So, is there a way of being able to take the medication when they are eating? So I know that there are some changes to diabetes medications that we make, and it's specific to the type of medication that they're taking in terms of what we would normally do. So not necessarily stop, but you may reduce that medication or change the time that it's taken. So for example, if a patient is on something like gliclazide, which is an SU medication and can result in hypoglycemia, then we might advise that they take that at the time that they are eating towards the end of the fast. So when they've broken the fast with their largest meal, perhaps. So there are changes, but it's individual, and it's really important that that conversation is had, rather than omitting, either reducing or changing the timing that they may have that.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, the other medics on the call, Dr. Roshni and Dr. Khan, whether there's anything you want to add to that question.
I think that's a very sensible answer from Dr. Sattar. I think the only thing is, you know, in Ramadan, it's a privilege to be able to fast, but it's not there to, you know, make anyone ill. And, you know, that's why if someone is very ill and there's, you know, and they can't be moved, the medications, there is a sort of dispensation where instead of fasting, the person gives money to charity. I can't remember how much it is. I think it's something like how much you would feed another person for a day, for the whole month. And people appreciate that as well. So even if they haven't been able to fast, they've been able to do something to commemorate Ramadan still. And there's also so much more as well. Fasting is the main thing, but, you know, they can be praying and doing other things to make themselves feel better if they've been able to fast.
Thank you.
I think most bases have been covered, and I guess the other thing is if we don't know the answers, maybe because what we can do is find someone who can talk with the patient and sort of get their views about it as well. Because sometimes I think, in my experience, certainly when I've sat down with a couple of patients and we've talked about the pros and cons in terms of medication, if they were to miss it or if we tinkered around with it, how it might affect them. They've really appreciated that. And I think because everybody, I mean, faith is just such a subjective thing, isn't it? So I think if there are people that we think within our caseloads who would be wanting to fast, I suppose just encourage that conversation to start off with. So something can be personalized with regards to what their health status is, what medications they're having. And I guess as clinicians, if the more that we know about their health, especially in an inpatient setting, we can sort of prep for that a bit more. And I suppose if we're worried that we're not adequately ready really to impart knowledge, then we can find someone who is. And I think being in, you know, the geographical location that we are in, I think we're quite blessed with that compared to some places. So I suppose if we don't know where we're going, just reach out to someone and then we can find someone more suited in giving advice. Dr. Sattar, you've got your hand raised.
Hang on, I keep doing that. I just wanted to pick up on that, and I know that you know, you work in mental health, most of the professionals here, and what's interesting is looking at change behaviour, and as GPs we're very interested in that. And the latest research that I've come across, if we want people to stop smoking, then actually it takes 10 individual repeated interactions with a patient with a healthcare professional before they will even think about stopping smoking, which is quite a big number actually. So when we say to someone, don't fast because we don't think it's okay, lots of them still choose to fast. So I suppose that Huma, is very important, isn't it? To have that sensible discussion, but then also to be supportive.
Thank you. I think that's really important. I think one of the things that we try to pride ourselves on is person-centered care. And that means actually putting the patient in the heart of whatever we do. And that means collaborating and making those decisions with them and not necessarily for them. So it's about how we can support people best in practice and while they're in hospital. I'm going to shift, you know, we talk about diabetes and I do understand that, but fasting seems to be, intermittent fasting seems to be something that a lot of people are interested in as well, whether that's pertaining to religious reasons or whether that's just in relation to well-being. And I'm very much aware that, I mean, I do intermittent fasting. I started that this year. And one of the things that I know with the pandemic, a lot of people may have, you know, overindulged and whatnot, and they are trying to reduce their weight, and intermittent fasting is one of those things. So I guess in terms of diabetes, in terms of fasting as a whole, is there any top tips that can be offered?
So do you mean a diabetic that wants to perhaps observe intermittent fasting, or whether fasting has an impact on diabetes?
Yeah, both.
Both.
How to do
so
intermittent
it's
fasting.
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because actually what you're referring to is, so what you're referring to is what we call the 5-2 diet, very, very popular in recent days, actually. And there's no doubt that actually, if you eat less, then you're going to lose weight. If you're, you know, or if you're eating more, you need to spend that calorie intake. So, and it's interesting, isn't it, that the fasting probably does have an effect on the body and diabetes, but in either way. Because actually, when we do break the fast, we feel very hungry and we might make the wrong choices. And there's something around still exercising during fasting, but light exercise. So it's about choices, I think. And so, you know, you could be fasting, but make all the wrong choices when you're breaking the fast at the end of the day and actually result in weight gain. And it's interesting. Diabetologists in the UAE actually prescribe a pedometer if you're a newly diagnosed diabetic, actually, so that you walk 10,000 steps a day, and actually that is very impactful. So there's no doubt that there's a link between body fat, insulin resistance, and so losing weight is a really, really important thing if you do want to if you do want to get your diabetes under control. Although we are seeing lots of the emergence of and recognition of lots of overlaps in terms of diabetes, especially people coming over from the Caribbean, specific type in Chapeltown where we work, that we've identified. So very, very interesting, different types of, where actually they present as a type 1 diabetic, very, very high blood sugars, need insulin, but then almost sort of resolves itself. So very, very interesting types of diabetes.
Yes, thank you so much for that. That's really helpful. Is there any other questions anyone would like to ask Dr. Sattar? Okay, cool. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Sattar. I mean, would you kindly return host to myself? So, and I'd like to now introduce you to Dr. Huma Khan. Huma is somebody that we know very well. She attends our network and she's very active with us. Huma is a trainee psychiatrist with us, and then she's shared a lot of reflection over the past year with us, and Huma is going to share some of her reflections in terms of her personal experience and talk a little bit about what Ramadan means to her.
Thanks, Wendy. And thanks, Dr. Sattar, as well. I think I did see you in Twitter world initially, so it's finally good to see you in our session. So yeah, as Wendy said, it's going to be a little bit of a reflection about Ramadan, because I think in terms of the places where I've worked in over the years and when I've studied, faith has been something we don't talk about. Spirituality is something we don't talk about. We had the very first Islamophobia Awareness Month, which I think those discussions were quite good, and I felt they were quite impactful. And I guess we're in such a weird space right now with this pandemic. It's something most of us have, we've not seen this in our lives, and it's the first time that we're doing this. And I remember it was everything was kicking off with the first round of the first wave, and then we shortly had Ramadan after it. So it's been odd. So what I'm hoping to do is just start off, I'm going to assume that people have zero knowledge about Islam and Ramadan, and just probably give my understanding and perspective, and then talk a bit about how it's impacted me at work as someone from the workforce, but also in terms of some of the issues that we might have in how we deliver our services. Not an expert at all, so anything that I say is just from my experience, and I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody else who identifies or doesn't identify. Wow, what a disclaimer. Identifies or doesn't identify with the Islamic faith. But broadly speaking, as Dr. Sattar mentioned, fasting happens in the month of Ramadan. So Ramadan is a whole month affair, and it's one of the holiest months, and it's for a number of reasons. I mean, other than the fasting, it's when the Quran was revealed to the Prophet, and the Quran is like the standing miracle within the Islamic faith. So it's such an important month just for, that alone makes it quite significant. There's a major sort of community aspect to it. There are, approximately 1.8 to 2 billion Muslims across the world. And generally speaking, everybody is fasting, during that time across the world. And there's such a sense of unity, there's such a sense of community. Not only are we fasting together, people will go to the mosque and pray together. It's a time to see your family, after a day's of fast, just spending time with your loved ones. There's some real solidarity in there. And I think in this last year, that has really been disrupted. We've not been able to see family. We've not been able to send food across. And because it's been this really odd time, we've not been able to share, our sorrows together, and, at such a crucial time. So last Ramadan and this Ramadan as well, I expect it's going to feel quite alone. It's going to be quite isolating. And, you know, you can have things like Zoom iftars, and iftar is when you break your fast at sundown. You can have those, but I think how we're used to having things, it's not like that. And that makes me a bit sad, I think, personally as well. So that's Ramadan essentially. But the time is also not just about fasting, it's about strengthening and working on the relationship, the spiritual relationship that we have with God, reflecting, you know, on in terms of our relationship with people. It's about giving charity, it's about studying and bettering ourselves. It's an incredibly spiritual time. And with me, compared to most of my family, they call me the laid-back Muslim, so that sets the scene a little. But it's just such a special time for that. And I guess in terms of things that are important for people to consider, and the things that have been important to me have been, so, you know, we pray 5 times a day. I mean, well, I pray 5 times a day. And if I'm at work, that can sometimes be a bit disrupted, which is fine. I can work around that. But during Ramadan especially, I've had the preference of wanting to pray, you know, at the set timing. So you have the morning prayer, then you've got the sort of afternoon, late afternoon, evening and night prayers. And in Ramadan, you've got some optional ones if you want to do them, you know, if you want to do the extra ones. And I sort of realized that having that time and space for me to pray during the working day, during Ramadan, became quite important. And I was quite blessed in the sense that most of my work colleagues have been absolutely fine with it. And there has been a dedicated prayer room or a chapel or a place for sort of interfaith reflection time. And that's worked quite well. But I also know not everybody will have that. And as odd as it might sound, that there are small things sometimes which can, which will become quite important. So before every prayer, there's the mandatory cleansing yourself. So, you know, washing your hands, your face, your elbows, having water over your head, washing your feet. Now, if you're at work and if you're like in a dingy little toilet space, it can become quite difficult. And it's things like that, you know, as opposed to, you know, I've had employers say, right, Huma, yeah, you can go and pray, you know, it's fine. But it's the act before and after that are quite important as well. You know, so I remember working in a place where the bathrooms weren't really cleaned as regularly. And if I'm going to try and cleanse myself, but I'm just feeling a bit grossed out, that's going to impact the quality of my prayer. That's going to impact how I'm going to probably feel for the rest of the day as well. And in terms of spaces as well, yes, there can be a designated prayer room, but you know, it was this one particular problematic place. It was literally, you could just go in there and just about stand and bend forward, and there was no space. You know, another person couldn't pray alongside you. And once again, when we're in a month where it is about community, where there might be a number of other colleagues who are also fasting, sometimes it's nice to pray with people as well. You know, and so it's these sort of small things, I think, that I realized became quite important to me during Ramadan. And in terms of expectations from sort of employers and people that we're working with, it's been great to have a very brief conversation where a colleague has said, okay, well, you know, what's Ramadan about? Why are you doing it? And it's those tiny moments where you can bring a part of yourself and something that is so inherent to you, and you can talk about it. You know, it just feels nice. And you get used to some of the questions that are like, you're not even water. It's like, no, not even water. And Dr. Sattar mentioned this quite briefly, actually, and I'd say, you know, just if you're uncomfortable in terms of eating because someone else is fasting, try not to be. At least ask. I think no matter what faith or behavior, whatever it is that we're observing, I'd much rather someone says, well, we're gonna eat. Do you want to join and sit there? Is that going to make you uncomfortable? Because I know people can get uncomfortable if they're eating and someone else isn't, but conversely, if you don't eat with that person might spend their break by themselves, sat all alone. And, you know, I'd much rather not be fasting, but spend time with, you know, my work family and have it as a normal process. And, you know, some people might think, I don't want to sit down with someone who's eating. I'd much rather spend that time elsewhere. So I suppose, and, you know, it's a point for me as well as I move forward, I need to ask more and assume less. You know, if I see a Muslim colleague, it might be that they choose not to fast, or they don't want to fast, or they don't want to sit down with someone. I think what I've learned is I'd much rather appreciate being asked what it is that I want and what I'm comfortable with, and then see if the other person is comfortable with that as well. Because it might be, you know, I have a friend who becomes grossly uncomfortable when she has to eat and if I'm fasting. And that's sort of been something that, you know, I've realized having those conversations is quite important. And break times as well. I think if there is flexibility with break times and how we want to spend them, and when we take those breaks, I think Ramadan is probably one of, you know, I've known people who are happy to work crazy hours as long as they know that during Ramadan, they can have, you know, their breaks at a flexible time, or if they can have a couple of days off and have their annual leave for Eid. And people will plan for this a year before if they can. That's how important it can be to some people. Sometimes get people like me who'd be like, right, I'll take one day off for Eid, but the second day I'll be begging people, you know, let me back at work. So, you know, it really does vary. So I guess from, you know, a work perspective, I'd just say it's about having the conversations and just being aware of the workforce, really. But something that I do often think about is in terms of our patients, I think we are quite unique in the work that we do when it comes to mental health, because it's not as straightforward as somebody might have diabetes or somebody's got a certain condition and they want to fast. We're also thinking about what is their mental state at the moment. If it's an inpatient who wants to fast, and let's say they're presenting either a very stringent sort of way in terms of what they want to do and we're really concerned, I think as a workforce, we've got additional challenges than, let's say, a consultant in chest medicine might have in their community setting as well. And I just really want to reiterate the point that if we're uncomfortable and if we think that, you know what, I'm not sure how to go about this, we must really seek out some more support, not just for the physical health, but also for spiritually as well. You know, if there is, if there is an imam, or if the patient has a chosen imam or a chosen mosque, you know, I think reaching out to, let's say, Bilal Mosque in Leeds and speaking to a specific person that the patient might want, just a quick phone conversation. Not only will that add to our own learning, whether, you know, we identify with Islam or not, but it also shows some proactivity and shows, you know, some compassion for the spiritual side of patients as well. And that's something that I found is a lot better in Leeds or in Yorkshire. And I don't know whether that's because we're more multicultural, but there have been places that have said, well, you know, this is what's on the menu today and this is what we're serving, and then after 8 o'clock there'll be a sandwich. You know, there have been places like that. And that's the only other point that sticks out, really. In terms of giving a sort of a best and worst spectrum, one of the best things that I've experienced have been where my consultant has sat me down and said, I know that this month is coming up. What is it that you want to do? How can we make it better for you? And that's been absolutely amazing. And my worst sort of experience has been, I won't name the hospital, but during Ramadan, in the sweltering heat, they decided to have a staff patient barbecue during Ramadan, where 35 to 45% of the workforce was identifying with the Islamic faith and were actively fasting. I'm not going to say that, you know, it's fair enough. Don't say Ramadan, you know, happy Ramadan or acknowledge it, but then to be a major hospital and to have something like that was quite insensitive. And because I'm email queen, that was an email that was shot off to say actually that's quite insensitive. I don't see LYPFD having Ramadan barbecues, but just to highlight that some things that we can say or do just leave that impact, and they can leave that bitter taste. And I think no matter who we are, and what I know of our network members, we all have this thing where we listen and where we check in with each other. And I think that just means the world. And being in a COVID environment where I know this year I'm not going to be able to see my aunts and uncles. And ever since I've been a kid, one of the major memories that I've got of every single Eid of my conscious being awake, I remember my uncles go to the mosque, pray, and the first house that they've stopped off at has been our house, and they'll say some prayers, and mum will have prepared something sweet and they'll have that. And out of the 33 years of my existence, in just the last 2, that's not happened. And I didn't and I'm thinking to myself, I'm a grown-ass woman, that should not impact me. I'm blubbering like a bloody baby whale because I didn't see my uncles, as I have done every Eid morning at 9:30. And I've realized I've just blabbered on and I don't even recall half of what I have said. I hope that's been a little bit helpful in at least giving insight as to how important this can be. And, I'm apparently chilled out and the laid back one who doesn't really care about Eid in my house. But there's such a spectrum as to how important Ramadan is. But I think it's safe to say for everybody who's observing it or is related to the month in any way, or even the faith, it's very, very different. And there's a lot that has been given up. And I think if I get my activism head on as well, with the last Eid, when you get an announcement at about 10 p.m. saying, all right, people, don't mix. It's like somebody in the cabinet woke up and thought, oh shit, it's Eid tomorrow. Let's send out a message and say, we're having a pseudo lockdown. Things like that stick, and it's bitter. And part, and I had this conversation with a couple of friends who were like, oh yeah, are we going to be getting the no Eid message this year? So, we're going into Ramadan, we're thinking, right, this is the second Ramadan, not having family over. We're not going to celebrate normally. What are we going to, our personal life has been disrupted like this. What messages are we going to receive on a public front and on a political front? And when we're in COVID tiredness and COVID fatigue, really, your resilience is low. You just feel shit about a lot of things, and you think, well, it's not going to be a great experience, and and it's meant to be this super spiritual event. It's just something to be mindful of, I think. But anyone, feel free to chip in at this stage. I realize I'm great at bringing the mood low.
I just want to ask one question. I know you mentioned quite a lot of things, and I think thank you very much for sharing, because spirituality is so important, and in considering we are in the midst of we're still very much in the midst of a pandemic, and a very trying time for a lot of us. Most people who are of a religious disposition tend to revert to their faith for that support as well. But one of the things that you talked about just now in relation to practices and the before and after of prayer, whilst you're at work, and you talked about the environment. Now, there's two things that I wanted. How important is the environment in terms of doing the ritual before and after prayer, i.e. the washing of yourself, etc. And how do you work around that when your work environment may not allow for, not every area or unit has faith centers perhaps, or if you're in an inpatient setting, you may not have a space that allows for privacy. How important is that, and how have you gotten around that? Or if anybody else on the call has an idea of how they've managed that for themselves or with colleagues, that'd be really, really great to share.
super important. I think so it's known as the wudu, or the ablution, or the washing prior to prayer, and it is incredibly important, to the point that if you're not pure and clean in a certain manner, done in a certain step, you don't pray. That's how important it is. And so having a space that caters for that. I mean, sometimes my mum and I were talking about this. Part of the washing yourself process is you have to wash your feet as well. They have to be clean. And we had a colleague who was performing this. Somebody came in, frowned upon that. Next week, there was a sign saying, wash your hands only in this, please, in the sink. So that person then had to find, other means. So the washing part is incredibly important. And I guess the other thing is, if there's an environment that I'm not confident that is clean, me going through that ritual, I'm still feeling unclean, I'm going to doubt whether my prayer has happened. And personally speaking, if I am doubting whether I'm clean enough, I wouldn't pray. During non-Ramadan times, or sometime if I'm not too happy that the place is clean enough, I've actually not prayed, and I've just gone home and done it. And there is scope to do that, but it's personally, for me, it's not ideal. If I've got the time, and if my workforce is happy with me to go away and pray, I have everything that I need. But if that space isn't clean, then it's like, well, what am I doing? And I guess the other important point is, in terms of how I've gotten away, and this is what is, makes me uncomfortable now that I think about it. And I'll give this little bit of information before. So what I'm about to describe is not something that people have asked me to do, but it's something that I've gone on to do because I was uncomfortable with whether the bathrooms are clean. So my sort of mechanism was not to drink water when I leave my house, make sure that I'm in a state of wudu, and throughout the day, just not drink. So I don't have to go to the loo, so I don't have to wash myself. And that can be so uncomfortable, and especially during times when it's, the temperatures are up and the days are longer. I remember at university, I could just pop home very quickly. It was a 15-minute walk there and back. And, it was a choice. That's what I did, because I wasn't really happy with, the cleanliness of the washrooms there and then. But I don't think that's unusual for a lot of people who don't feel confident enough in terms of, the facilities. Sometimes I've also worked in places where the prayer room, or I've been off-site, so I've been working in a porter cabin elsewhere, and there's not really been a place to pray. And that's not fine. As long as I'm allowed to pray, I can just lock the door, and 10-15 minutes somewhere, I can just say my prayers and be done with it. But once again, sometimes that has been met with, raised eyebrows, or are you sure you should be, just look of distrust, or somebody gets a bit uncomfortable with that. And then you get emails that are like, oh, please only use the prayer room facilities. I'm not saying that's happened here, but in society that has happened. One of my universities was extremely unreasonable. The local prayer room was about 15-minute walk away. The campus was massive, and it was, and during the snowy period, we decided, well, we'll just find some corner where nobody's really there and we can pray. Somebody walked by, disapproved, and then we were told, no, if you want to pray, please use this facility that has been provided. And in snowy, coldy, crappy weather, it's like, really? 5 to 7 minutes? How has that? Because it's not that we have a facility, use that. It's like, what we're seeing here is problematic. We don't want to see this.
Yeah. So facilities and having the right environment is really important, and ensuring that where units don't have a faith room, for example, perhaps making sure that the rooms that are available in an inpatient setting, for example, are regularly cleaned, and so cleanliness is obviously really important, and that's really good to know. The other thing that I wanted to ask you, and in terms of, we're in the midst of a pandemic again, and infection control is a big thing. I know one of the things that I sort of advise is colleagues is to bring their own prayer mat, so they don't have to share. So is there any other tips in terms of praying safely in relation to an infection control, situation?
Yeah, I think that, there has to, I mean, as I said, praying together and that feel of a community is so important. And when non-COVID times, when you see people praying, you're sort of praying in a line together. And, we're all sensible people. Yes, that's not going to happen. But us, so I'd say we're quite good in that sense, we are socially distant. If there's a room that's big enough and there are 2 or 3 people in there, just making ourselves far apart, if we've identified this is a space where people can come and pray, no matter what faith they're of, have stuff there that they can clean the surface down themselves. I think these small gestures are quite important. In terms of bringing home prayer mats, I think is a great idea. If people can't do that for whatever reason, or, there are these wipe downable prayer mats as well. It doesn't have to be of a fabric, because as long as that space is clean, it can be anything that we sort of, sometimes I'll just use one of my massive bedsheety scarves that I'll place somewhere and I'll just pray on top of that, as long as it's clean. But I think that's it really. It doesn't, there's not much that I can think of in the way of high maintenance requirements. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that.
Any other?
No, in terms of, the performance of the prayer, like Huma said, a mat, even, a clean area, if there's nothing else, a clean sort of surface is fine, because it's actually the act of prayer that's the most important, and you're connecting with your Creator. And I think, you've covered things anyway, but the washroom facilities is more of an issue, really, isn't it? I think in terms of what's required, that is more problematic. The area, any sort of reasonably clean area is fine, and you can even put like a piece of paper down, that you normally use for the patient sort of beds, and even that's fine. It's not a massive requirement that you have to have a prayer mat or anything like that, really.
Yeah, and I guess I've just realised I've sort of gone on about the particulars of it, but I suppose if we was to sort of try and understand as to why it might seem, because to a lot of my friends, who don't know much about Islam, when they hear this, they're like, wow, that's a bit overkill. Why are you so particular? But I think, at least for me, at least if I speak for myself, the act of praying, and because it looks like a specific ritual, but it's essentially you taking time out of your day where you are in direct conversation with God. That's essentially what it is. And I guess that is supposed to be time where you take out from the rest of the world, and it's your reflection, your mindfulness, you meditating, and the act of directly conversing with God. It's quite a big deal. Hence all of these other things of, if you're going to do it, don't make it a ritual. Take the time out if you can. Yes, there are provisions, of praying later if I want to, but once again, I think generally our workforce has been quite, is understanding and caters for that. But it's just these small details as well. So that's the reason why it seems all quite pernickety, but that's the impact of it. And that prayer time during Ramadan, it becomes way more magnified as well for a lot of people.
Yeah, and my understanding of prayer times is also depending on the light of the day and stuff like that. So that there's an
yeah.
I don't want to say there's a flexibility in terms of depending on, as Dr. Sattar had mentioned about summer and winter prayer are slightly different times. How do we encourage, or how do we start these conversations in the workplace? Anybody, I mean, this is open to everybody. How do we inject these conversations within the work environment that makes it okay to have? Has anyone tried this?
I think one thing I was actually gonna add to I mean, thanks so much, Huma, for all you said. But I think one thing that came out from most of your part of your discussion is how the support you do have is like when how important that is for you. What are the support from your colleagues or maybe your line manager or something like that? And that comes back to what Wendy is trying to ask, because I think sometimes there could be a lot of assumptions. We could assume a lot. We could, if you have like a big team, we could assume like we know who is observing Ramadan and who is not, and we could get that wrong easily. And I think then the importance of that conversation where not just on the line manager or supervisors or our colleagues, but for us as individuals as well, if we're gonna be observing that, to have that conversation with our line manager, to be able to say, I'm gonna, prior to the month, probably like a month before the Ramadan period, to be able to say, I'm gonna be observing Ramadan, to kind of, what kind of support we're gonna need. And I think that conversation is very, very important as well, because that helps both ways. Then like you said something about to ask more and assume less. I think that's where that comes in really. And from you then, how important is that kind of conversation, whether with your colleagues or your line manager? Yeah.
No, definitely. And I think it's definitely a bilateral thing. I mean, with Ramadan especially, it's something that, you can prepare for. You know roughly when it's going to be. Yes, every year it doesn't fall on the same date, but you definitely know, but it's going to fall roughly about a week to 10 days before. So, my personal practice is so before I sort of start a job, if I know that I'm working here for a year, right at the beginning, I'll flag up, right, these are important days for me, so as soon as I have the information, I like to prep for it. But I suppose as a workforce, with specifically to Ramadan, if I'm managing a ward or if I'm managing a team, I generally like to say, right, if anyone has any important dates, any sort of spiritual, personal, things that are important, get in touch and, we can work around if there are any requirements. With Ramadan specifically, I'd say, I understand it's Ramadan's coming up, or said festival or said important time is coming up. Is anyone going to be affected? Please reach out, and I've sort of set that invitation. And if somebody does want to reach out, great. If they don't, fair enough. Because I think, as I said, it's 1.8 billion people following a faith that there's going to be huge variety in how people observe things and how things are going to be important. For some people, there might be very particular about certain things. Other people are like, well, actually, I'd rather not talk about it and crack on. And it can really vary. But I think from a workforce perspective, as long as we've, people in leadership positions say, right, this is coming up, I'm all ears, I'm here, that means quite a lot. And the responsibility, I suppose, if I'm speaking for myself, is if I have certain needs, I'd want to reach out and say, right, this is coming up.
Thank you so much. That was a very, very interesting conversation. And any last questions in relation to this before we kind of move forward? I think we'll share the slides that Dr. Sattar has done. And Huma, thank you so much for your personal reflections on this. This is really important. There's a lot of important conversations to be had before Ramadan starts, or before any faith, because I believe it's really important to understand team members, colleagues, our service users, and understand what reasonable adjustments can be made in order to accommodate people's identity and allow them to be their their full self at work. So I think that's really important. We talk a little bit about the environment and the importance of cleanliness during Ramadan. We talked about the importance of the rituals before and after, but the most important aspect of Ramadan during the prayer time is connecting with your Creator, being able to have that moment where you are able to actually use the times specified for prayer. And I think that's really important. I think we acknowledge that not all the environments are cater for everybody's prayer needs, and it's about how we can use the environments to manipulate it or to create privacy for people who are sort of wanting to pray. And I think that's something. It's really tricky sometimes. I find when you're in a PFI building and there's limitations in terms of how you can actually sort of change the fabric of the building to create, but I think there are flexibilities and there are ways in which we can actually sort of alter this if we really sort of work together to actually find those. We talk about our patients and how we can support our patients to actually adhere to the Ramadan period, whether that's adjusting their medications if can be, or meal times, because I know meal times within some of our inpatient service is very set, and that is because of the way in which the meals are prepared, etc. We talk about the choices of food as well, because that's really important, and what you use to break your fast is important. So there's a lot of different elements in terms of we need to sort of go away and possibly begin to have those conversations with our colleagues in order to ensure that we are supporting them correct. We talk about using the community to support some of the knowledge. We had Dr. Sattar, who's a GP. We have our own medical staff within our workforce. We have faith leaders who are within our community, but also within our workforce as well, that we can actually draw upon in order to actually get the best knowledge that we need to support colleagues and support our service users. So that's really, really helpful. And I do believe that these conversations hasn't just ended, we've just begun. And we need to carry on those conversations in our workplace. This session is recorded. It will be available within the Trust website, and we can actually use it to actually sort of initiate conversations and continue conversations. So thank you so much for your input. I know we come into the end of our meeting, and one of the things that I wanted to sort of touch upon as we are ending is last week the report on race disparity was released, and within that report there was a lot of controversial topics being addressed in terms of how the language was used, and in terms of how the government viewed some of the health inequalities and the structures that are within the country. And I think one of those things we felt it was really important yesterday at the briefing, our chief exec briefing, Dawn Hanwell, who was stepping in for Sarah, who is currently on leave, actually acknowledged the importance of the report, also acknowledged the importance of health inequalities that exist. So I just wanted to sort of bring that point and sort of reassure everybody within the network that LYPFT are very much aware of the inequalities and the structural inequalities that exist, health inequalities that we as an organization working within our organization and working across the system, i.e. across the region and with our communities to address, is going to continue, and we're going to keep moving forward with this. And we're still waiting on the response from the government in terms of some of the challenges that was put upon them. So we'll wait and see what that says. But for now, I want for you guys to be assured that our network very much disagree with some of the wording and some of the way in which the report structured their views, and we will continue to support our workforce to move forward with this, and we will continue to support our service users and our community to move forward in addressing some of the health inequalities that exist amongst us. So I think that's really important to actually sort of say that, you know, we are united in terms of moving forward, and we are united in terms of our views of the report, but we will wait for the government's response, and we'll wait for the race observatory response in relation to this as well, because they are taking this forward too. So if there's any other business that anybody else wants to raise today? Cool. Abby, is there anything that we need to share?
No, I think it was much more about the reports that I wanted to touch on, and you've touched it,
Yeah.
just to give that reassurance.
Yeah.
to people. Then our next meeting date, just to remind people.
Yes. Our next meeting date is, I want to say it's in May. I'm wanting to believe it's the 13th of May, but I can clarify that date for you guys. Yeah, so I clarified that in an email to everybody. Is there any last words anybody want to share or ask? I'm aware that we're in the middle of a annual leave period where it's half term for many people, so we may have missed a lot of colleagues, but this is going to be recorded, and we will share that with everyone in the trust. So thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate your time and your patience today.